Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going to be discussing North and South Korea. You can see them highlighted on this map. Obviously, North Korea is the north one, South Korea is in blue. We're going to be looking at some of their history today, but also trying to understand how North Korea sort of differs from many countries in the world, how it's kind of isolated on its own. So Korea used to be one country. It has a long history of warfare. It was conquered by China. It was conquered by Japan. During the Cold War, when the U.S. versus Soviet Union were happening, it got split in half. Korea got split into two countries. The northern half became communist, like China, like the Soviet Union, and the south became non-communist, like the United States, like Japan. This didn't last very long before there was war. North Korea invaded South Korea, but with the help of the United States, the U.S. defended South Korea, and they ended up fighting to what we call a stalemate, a tie. And it was, they drew sort of a line and said, this is where it's going to be cut in half. And that's how things ended. They didn't officially end the Civil War. It's still going on. They just have a line cutting the country in half. And one side is South Korea, one side's North Korea. And it's been sitting like that for 70 years or so. The line is called the DMZ, the Demilitarized Zone. It's the most contentious border in the world. They are ready to fight war at any moment. There are soldiers pointing guns at each other at all times, tanks, missiles, everything's lined up. Both sides are ready to fight at any moment, and they have been for decades. There's a lot of current conflict between the two. They don't get along. There have been lots of efforts to sort of patch things up and kind of move on since the Cold War is over. But neither side's really willing to give in right now. They've agreed to do some things together to try and be more peaceful and do more interactions. But ultimately, the conflict is still there. No one's allowed to cross the border. No one from South Korea is allowed in North Korea. People from North Korea are not allowed to leave. Here's some pictures of the Korean War. Here's the current border from a few years ago. And like I said, that it's very contentious. These blue houses are right on the border. That's where they go to negotiate. But anyone crosses the line, like both sides are ready to fight immediately. So North Korea is a communist dictatorship. One person has all the power, all the control, similar to China, except in North Korea, it's all one family. It's Kim Jong-un and his father and grandfather. They're the ones who've been the dictators. So it's being handed down from father to son. And they're beyond just dictators. They're sort of like demigods. Right? They believe that, that they're above average humans. So North Koreans believe that the Kim Jong-un is halfway in between human and being a god himself. And they sort of worship him. He forces them to worship him. The people there have basically no rights and freedoms. It's probably the least free country in the world. They're not allowed to leave. They're not allowed to vote. They're not allowed to make hardly any decisions on their own. The government tells them what to do. And the government also keeps information from them. They're not allowed to know what's going on in the world. They're one of the least developed countries in the world. Not a lot of people have access to like electricity or water or any sort of modern technology. Here's Kim Jong-un. Here's some pictures. He often parades the military up and down the street as a threat to his own people and also a threat to South Korea. They drive their missiles around. The scary thing is North Korea actually has a nuclear weapon now, too. They don't have really the system to launch it very far, but if they wanted to, they could nuke South Korea. They could probably nuke Japan, which is pretty scary. What we're looking at here is a concentration camp in North Korea. If you say something bad about Kim Jong-un, you do something wrong, you will be executed, probably tortured, and your family for 3 generations has to live in a concentration camp. And so your kids, your grandkids, great-grandkids will all suffer for your crime, which is a really good way to get people to do what you want, is to overly punish their family. And inside these concentration camps is slave labor, starvation, torture, all those things. During Trump's presidency, he made a lot of effort to try and bridge the gap. He was one of the first presidents to talk with people from North Korea in decades. He tried to create some sort of peace deal. None of it really worked. None of it really stuck. But it was sort of like opening the door. Since Biden has been president, not much has happened. It's sort of still in this sort of, well, they've talked. They took one step in the right direction, but there's still all this conflict that they haven't gotten over yet. North Korea is probably the most isolated country in the world. We've talked about how every country interacts on this global economy, globalization, social globalization. North Korea is the opposite. They really only interact positively with Russia and China. They don't do business with any other country. Their people aren't really allowed to leave or talk to people around the world. Very isolated. Not involved in the global economy, hardly at all. And as a result, a lot of their people are stuck in pretty bad poverty. And they're very underdeveloped as a country. So if we look at some pictures of North Korea, this is their capital, Pyongyang. They got this cool looking building. They got big buildings and streets and all this. It feels like something's missing. Like, where are all the people, all the cars? They've built stuff because Kim Jong-un has a ton of slave labor. He can build things, but a lot of these buildings are empty. There's no people in them. There's no plumbing going into them. There's no electricity. One of the things North Korea does is they like to build things to try and show off to the world and hide the embarrassing pictures. This is really what North Korea is more like. People who are really struggling in poverty while cities are empty, because the cities don't really have anything in them. They're just empty buildings. A lot of people in North Korea are starving, malnourished. And this is crazy. North Korea satellite image at night. You can see it's basically dark. Here's their capital, Pyongyang. A couple other cities that have some lights, but for the most part, it's empty because people don't have access to electricity. They don't have access to clean water or good food. They're extremely underdeveloped compared to South Korea down here, very well lit up. Japan, extremely lit up. China, all these countries that have developed, North Korea has not. There's a lot of differences. North Korea's roads are mostly unpaved, dirt roads. Almost no one has a cell phone. In fact, over the decades, they've been so unhealthy. South Koreans are actually, on average, taller than North Koreans because they're healthier. We'll watch a video explaining some of the differences between the two. Your goal today is to read about a high school student from the United States who's half Russian, half American, who got to travel to North Korea. Your goal is to make a Venn diagram explaining similarities and differences.